The moment they laughed at my husband, something inside me went quiet. It was not loud anger. It was not tears. It was that hollow sound you feel when dignity leaves the room and no one rushes to pick it up. The band was tuning their instruments. Silverware clinked against plates. Someone spilled wine near the dance floor and laughed it off. My son Daniel stood at the altar, shoulders squared, jaw tight, trying to look older than his 28 years. And beside me, my husband Frank adjusted his jacket, the same one he had worn to church for 15 years, the elbows a little shiny, the sleeves just a touch too short. I saw the glance before I heard the laughter. Two of the bride's uncles leaned toward each other. One whispered something, the other snorted, then it spread, a ripple of quiet mockery like a bad smell moving through the front rows. "Is that what he's wearing?" someone murmured, not nearly as softly as they thought. Frank heard it, I know he did. His hand tightened around mine just for a second, then loosened. He kept his eyes forward. He always did when the world tried to remind him where it thought he belonged. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to say something sharp and cutting and final. But the music started, and the bride walked in, and the day moved forward without waiting for my pride. That was the beginning of everything that came after. Before that day, our life was simple, not easy but honest. Frank and I met 41 years earlier at a hardware store on Maple Street. He was buying nails. I was buying a paintbrush I could not afford. He offered to pay the difference, then spent 10 minutes apologizing for the audacity of kindness. That was Frank, careful with words, generous in action, afraid of taking up too much space. We raised Daniel in a small, narrow house with creaky floors and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and fried onions. Frank worked maintenance for the city, fixing pipes, unclogging drains, patching walls after other people broke them. He came home tired, hands rough, boots leaving a trail of dust by the door. Daniel adored him when he was little, followed him everywhere, asked 1,000 questions about tools and screws and how things fit together. Frank taught him patience by example. If something broke, you did not throw it away, you sat with it, you learned its weakness, you fixed it. I worked part-time at the library. I liked the quiet, the order of shelves, the smell of old paper and lemon cleaner. Together we made enough, not more than enough, but enough to sleep at night without fear. Things shifted when Daniel went to college. He came back with new words, new clothes, a new way of looking at the world. He loved us, I never doubted that. But he started correcting his father in public, rolling his eyes at stories about work, laughing when Frank talked about budgets or saving for emergencies. "Dad, that's not how people do things anymore," he would say, smiling like it was harmless. Frank would nod, smile back, let it pass. Then Daniel met Clara. She was beautiful in a clean, sharp way, perfect posture, hair always smooth, shoes that never scuffed the floor. She shook my hand like she was closing a deal. She hugged Frank briefly, careful not to wrinkle her coat. Her family was different from ours. Big house, loud opinions, money that spoke without raising its voice. Her father, Richard, owned several car dealerships. He liked to tell people that within the first 5 minutes of meeting them. Her mother, Susan, wore pearls even to the grocery store. From the start, they treated Frank like furniture, something functional, something invisible. At dinners, Richard talked over him, asked Daniel questions about his career while Frank sat there buttering bread, listening. When Frank mentioned his work, Susan would smile politely and ask Claire about her yoga studio. I noticed, Frank noticed, Daniel noticed too, though he pretended not to. When Daniel told us they were getting married, I cried, not because I was sad, because I was scared. Weddings have a way of putting class on display. They make quiet people smaller and loud people larger. Still, Frank and I did what parents do. We contributed what we could, not much compared to the bride's family, but every dollar was earned. Frank took extra shifts, fixed neighbors' fences for cash. He never complained. "I want my son to start his marriage without debt," he said one night, counting bills at the kitchen table. "That matters." The wedding was held at a country club with tall windows and white tablecloths so thick they felt like fabric from another life. I wore a navy dress I altered myself. Frank wore his best suit, the one he saved for funerals and holidays. That suit became the joke of the afternoon. It happened during the speeches. Richard stood first. He talked about legacy, about standards, about how Claire had always deserved the best. People laughed at his jokes, clapped loudly. Then Frank stood. He cleared his throat. The microphone squealed for a moment, then settled. His hands shook just slightly. I knew that shake. It meant he cared deeply. He spoke about Daniel as a boy, about scraped knees, about late nights fixing a bike so it would be ready for the morning. He talked about love as work, as patience, as choosing someone every day even when it is hard. His voice was steady, his words were honest. And still someone laughed. A sharp, careless laugh from the side tables, then another. Someone mimicked the way Frank pronounced a word. Someone whispered about his hands, about his suit. I saw Daniel's face tighten. I saw Clara stare straight ahead, her smile frozen. Frank finished his speech. He smiled, he nodded, he sat down. No one defended him. Not Richard, not Susan, not Clara. Not even Daniel. That silence was louder than the laughter. After the wedding, things changed. Frank became quieter, Daniel visited less. When he did, Clara stayed in the car or checked her phone the entire time. They moved into a house closer to her parents. Invitations to family dinners stopped coming. When Frank tried to talk to Daniel about it, Daniel brushed it off. "They're just different, Dad," he said. "Don't take it personally." But it was personal. It always is when respect disappears. The first real clue that something was deeply wrong came months later, on a Sunday afternoon. Frank had gone to fix a leaking sink for a neighbor. I was folding laundry when Daniel called. His voice was strained, tight. "Mom, can you come by?" he asked. "I need to talk." I drove to their house. Clara's car was gone. Daniel sat at the kitchen island, head in his hands. The room smelled like cold coffee. He looked up at me with eyes I did not recognize. "Clara says Dad embarrassed her family," he said quietly. "She says people still talk about that speech." I waited. She says maybe it's better if we keep some distance." He continued, "From you and Dad." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. I thought of Frank under a sink, water dripping onto his hair, fixing something that was broken. "And what do you think?" I asked. Daniel swallowed. "I think I don't want to fight with my wife." That was when I understood that my son was standing at the edge of a long fall, and he did not yet see the ground below. I left without yelling, without crying. I drove home in silence. That night, Frank noticed something was wrong. "You're quiet," he said, washing his hands at the sink. "They want space," I said. He nodded, dried his hands, folded the towel carefully. "That's okay," he said. "They're building a life." But his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. That was the first crack. Small, easy to ignore, but cracks have a way of spreading, especially when pride and silence live in the same house. I did not know then how much worse it would get, or how life, patient and relentless, would teach my son a lesson no parent ever could. Distance does not arrive all at once. It sneaks in quietly, like dust on a shelf you stop wiping. Weeks passed without a call, then months. When Daniel did reach out, it was brief, polite, controlled, conversations about weather, work, nothing that required feeling. Frank never complained, he never chased. He believed that love should not beg. But I watched him change. He stopped humming while he shaved, stopped lingering over the newspaper. Some nights he sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, hands folded, staring at nothing. The house felt bigger then, emptier, as if Daniel had taken more than his childhood room when he left. Clara's influence was subtle but firm. She decided which holidays they attended, which dinners were too much, which topics made her uncomfortable, and somehow Frank became one of those topics. I heard it once by accident. Daniel had put his phone on speaker without realizing it while he stepped into another room. Clara's voice drifted through the kitchen, sharp and impatient. "Your father makes people uncomfortable," she said. "He doesn't fit in, Daniel. You can't expect me to keep apologizing for that." I stood there, holding the receiver of my own phone, heart pounding. When Daniel came back, he apologized quickly and hung up. He did not know I had heard every word. That night I told Frank what she said. He listened quietly, did not interrupt, did not defend himself. When I finished, he sighed and rubbed his palms together like he was warming them. "I never learned how to fit in," he said. "I only learned how to show up." That sentence stayed with me. The real unraveling began the following spring. Frank slipped on a wet stair at work and tore something in his back. The pain was immediate and unforgiving. He tried to work through it for weeks, refusing to see a doctor until he could barely stand straight. The diagnosis came back worse than we expected. Surgery, recovery, months without steady income. Daniel knew, we told him. He sent a text. "Hope Dad feels better soon." That was it. No visit, no call, no offer to help. Claire, I later learned, had decided it would be emotionally draining for Daniel to get involved. They had plans, trips, a lifestyle to maintain. Frank recovered slowly. He hated being idle, hated needing help, but he never asked Daniel for anything. Pride can be a shield, but it can also be a wall. One afternoon, while Frank napped in the living room, the doorbell rang. It was Susan. She stood on the porch in a cream-colored coat, sunglasses perched on her head, lips pursed like she was already disappointed. "I thought I'd stop by," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Claire mentioned things have been strained." She sat down, crossed her legs, looked around our living room like she was cataloguing flaws. "I think we need to be honest," she said. "Our families are very different." I waited. "Daniel is doing well," she continued. "His career, his social circle, he's moving in a certain direction, and Frank's background doesn't exactly support that image." I felt heat rise in my chest. "Our background raised him," I said. Susan smiled thinly. "Of course, but now he's building something else." She stood, smoothed her coat. "It might be best if you let him go," she said, "for everyone's sake." I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, shaking. When Frank woke, I did not tell him about the visit. Some truths protect no one. The months that followed were quiet, too quiet. Then came the call that changed everything. It was late, rain tapped against the windows. Daniel's name flashed on my phone. I answered immediately. "Mom," he said, breathless, "I need help." Something in his voice pulled me upright. "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. "I messed up." He came over that night alone. Claire stayed behind. He looked smaller somehow, the confidence stripped away. He paced the living room, hands running through his hair. "I made some bad decisions," he said, "financial ones." It took time to get the full story out of him. Claire had pushed for investments, fast returns, appearances. They borrowed against things they should not have touched. Daniel signed papers he barely read, trusting the confidence of people who spoke louder than they listened. Then the market shifted, deals collapsed, credit tightened. They were drowning. "I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed," Daniel said, voice cracking, "but I can't." I thought of Frank's hands, his careful way of reading contracts, of never spending money he did not already have. "Does Claire know you're here?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "She says this is my responsibility," he said. "She says involving you would make things worse." Frank had woken and stood in the doorway, listening. "Sit down," Frank said gently. Daniel did. For the first time in years, he looked at his father like he needed him. Frank asked questions, calm ones, about numbers, about timelines, about consequences. He listened without judgment. When Daniel finished, Frank nodded slowly. "You're not ruined," he said. "You're scared." Daniel broke then. He cried like a boy again, shoulders shaking, face buried in his hands. Frank put a hand on his back, just rested it there, steady. They stayed late going over paperwork. Frank spotted mistakes, risks, ways out that were not painless but possible. When Daniel left, it was near dawn. Claire did not thank us. In fact, she was furious. She called the next day, voice cold. "You went behind my back," she said to Frank. "You interfered." Frank listened. "You undermined Daniel," she continued. "You made him doubt my judgment." Frank's voice was calm. "I helped my son understand the truth." "That's not your place anymore," she snapped. There it was, the line drawn clean and sharp. After that, Daniel stopped calling again. Weeks later, the truth went public. A lawsuit, headlines, whispers in their social circle. The same people who once laughed at Frank's suit now avoided Daniel at parties. Invitations disappeared. Friends stopped returning calls. Clara blamed Daniel, loudly, publicly. And when the pressure peaked, she left. She packed her things while Daniel was at work and moved back in with her parents. She filed for separation within the month. Daniel showed up at our door again, this time hollow-eyed and thin. "I don't know who I am without all of it," he said. "Without her, without the life we built." Frank hugged him, held him longer than necessary. "You're still you," he said. "You just forgot for a while." That was when life delivered its lesson, not with cruelty but with clarity. Daniel stayed with us for a while, took a lower-paying job, sold the house, started paying debt slowly, painfully. One evening, as we ate dinner together, simple food at a familiar table, Daniel looked at his father and said something I had waited years to hear. "I'm sorry," he said, "for letting them treat you that way, for staying quiet." Frank nodded. "Apologies are heavy," he said, "but they can also set you down." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I thought fitting in meant leaving things behind," he said. "I didn't realize I was leaving myself." Outside, the rain started again, soft this time, gentle. Some lessons take a lifetime to learn, others arrive all at once, sharp and unforgiving. The fallout did not come all at once. It arrived in layers, each one heavier than the last. Daniel thought losing Clara would be the worst of it. He was wrong. What hurt more was how quickly the world that once applauded him turned its back. The same people who toasted his wedding with crystal glasses now crossed the street when they saw him. Friends he had invested years into building relationships with suddenly became too busy. Calls went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. One afternoon, Daniel came home holding an envelope. His hands were shaking. "They terminated my contract," he said quietly. Frank did not react the way most fathers would. He did not curse. He did not scold. He did not remind Daniel of warnings once given. He simply asked, "Did they say why?" Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Restructuring," he said. "Image concerns." That word again, image. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, where Frank once counted bills late into the night. He stared at the wood grain like it might explain something. "I spent years pretending I was better than where I came from," he said, "and now I don't belong anywhere." Frank poured him a cup of coffee, the cheap kind we had always bought, the kind that smelled like home. "Belonging isn't something you earn by impressing people," Frank said. "It's something you keep by honoring who you are." Daniel nodded, eyes wet. The public consequences came soon after. The lawsuit details leaked online, not all of them accurate but enough to stain his name. Clara's parents distanced themselves quickly. Richard released a carefully worded statement through a lawyer, making it clear that Daniel's decisions were his own. Susan unfriended him online before the ink was dry. The silence from that side of the family was sudden and complete. But silence has a way of making room for other voices. People from Daniel's past started reaching out, old classmates, a former co-worker from before Clara, even a neighbor Frank once helped repair a fence. One message stood out. It was from a community center on the east side of town. They were starting a youth maintenance program, teaching teenagers basic repair skills, budgeting, responsibility. Someone had recommended Frank. Daniel read the email aloud. "They're asking for you, Dad," he said. Frank looked surprised. "Me?" "They said you're known for being reliable," Daniel continued, "for showing up." Frank smiled, small and uncertain. "I've never taught before," he said. "You've been teaching your whole life," Daniel replied. Frank took the job. It did not pay much, it did not come with prestige, but every afternoon he came home tired in a different way, lighter, purposeful. He talked about the kids, about one boy who reminded him of Daniel at 12, about another who had never held a screwdriver before. Daniel started helping too, at first quietly, fixing things, listening more than he spoke. The kids did not care about his past job titles or his failed marriage. They cared that he showed them how to patch drywall and how to admit when something went wrong. One evening, after a long day at the center, Daniel sat beside Frank on the porch. The air smelled like cut grass and motor oil. "I used to be embarrassed by this neighborhood," Daniel said. "I thought leaving meant success." Frank leaned back in his chair. "Leaving isn't the same as growing," he said. That summer, something shifted in Daniel. He stopped trying to explain himself, stopped chasing approval. He dressed simpler, spoke slower, listened more. He learned how to live within his means, how to say no. He also learned who stayed when nothing was being offered. The first public moment of reckoning came unexpectedly. The community centre hosted a fundraiser. Small, local, folding chairs and homemade food, no photographers, no speeches about legacy. Daniel volunteered to speak. When he stepped up to the microphone, I felt that old fear twist in my chest, the memory of a wedding hall full of laughter not meant for us. Daniel cleared his throat. I used to believe success was about looking the part, he said, about impressing people who never planned to stay. The room was quiet. I forgot the value of honest work, he continued, and I forgot the people who taught me what that meant. He looked at Frank. My father showed me how to build things that last, he said. I ignored that lesson for too long. Applause followed, not the loud kind, the real kind, the kind that comes from recognition, not obligation. Someone in the back wiped their eyes. Frank did not smile. He simply nodded, accepting the moment without claiming it. After that night, word spread, slowly, naturally. Daniel was offered a steady job managing facilities for a non-profit. It was not glamorous, but it was honest. He took it without hesitation. Clara tried to reach out once. She sent a message, carefully worded, asking how he was doing, hinting at reconciliation, mentioning how hard things had been for her too. Daniel read it, sat with it, then deleted it. I don't want to go back to who I was when I was with her, he said. I nodded. Growth often looks like quiet decisions no one applauds. Time softened things. Daniel moved into a small apartment near us. He started cooking dinners, learning recipes Frank loved. He asked questions he never used to ask, about work, about marriage, about mistakes. One evening, as we washed dishes together, he said, I don't think I ever thanked you for staying. Frank handed him a towel. We don't keep score in families, he said. That fall, Daniel attended a wedding. A friend from the centre. No country club, no polished speeches, just laughter and food and dancing that spilled into the parking lot. He came home smiling. It felt real, he said. Later that night, I found Frank sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. He learned, Frank said quietly, that's all I ever wanted. I sat beside him. You were humiliated once, I said, publicly. Frank nodded. But you never became small, I continued. You stayed kind. He looked at me then, eyes tired but steady. Life has a way of correcting people, he said. We don't need to. The final piece of healing came on an ordinary afternoon. Daniel and Frank were fixing a door at the centre when a boy asked Frank why he never got angry when people disrespected him. Frank paused. Because anger gives them too much power, he said. Dignity is quieter. Daniel heard that. He carried it with him. Years later, when Daniel married again, the ceremony was simple. Backyard chairs, paper lanterns. Frank wore the same suit. This time no one laughed. They listened. And that made all the difference. The second wedding did not try to impress anyone. That was how I knew it would last. There were no crystal glasses or polished speeches about legacy. Just folding chairs borrowed from the church, lanterns strung through the trees, and food made by hands that knew us. Frank stood beside me in that same old suit, freshly pressed, shoes shined until they reflected the porch lights. Daniel waited at the end of the aisle, calmer than I had ever seen him. The woman he married, Emily, did not need to be told where we came from. She listened more than she spoke. She asked Frank about his work and actually waited for the answer. When she hugged him, she held on just a second longer than necessary. Respect, when it is genuine, is felt in the body before it is understood in the mind. As the ceremony ended and applause rose, I looked at Frank. His eyes were wet, but his posture was steady. Nothing in him asked for recognition. He did not need it anymore. After that day, life settled into a quieter rhythm. Daniel worked hard, came home tired in an honest way. He still carried the weight of his past mistakes, but it no longer bent his back. He and Emily lived simply. They argued sometimes, about money, about schedules, about dishes left in the sink, and then they talked it through. That was the difference. One evening, while we sat on the porch watching the sky fade, Daniel spoke again of that first wedding. I still think about it, he said, the way they laughed. Frank nodded, so do I. I should have said something, Daniel continued. I should have stood up. Frank looked at him carefully. You're standing now. That was not forgiveness, that was understanding. The public consequence, the one that mattered most, came quietly. Richard's business faced trouble not long after. Deals that once seemed solid fell apart. Partners distanced themselves. The same social circle that once orbited his success drifted away when the glow dimmed. He ran into Frank one afternoon at the hardware store. I was not there, but Frank told me later. Richard had looked older, smaller, less certain. They exchanged polite words, nothing more. As Richard walked away, Frank felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Relief. I didn't need anything from him, Frank said. That surprised me. That was how I knew we had healed. Years passed. The community center expanded. The maintenance program became a model for others. Frank's name appeared in a local newsletter once, a small photo, a short paragraph. Daniel brought it home like it was a treasure. You're famous, he joked. Frank laughed. Don't start. One day, a young man approached Daniel after a workshop. My dad never showed me any of this, he said, but your father did. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. That night he sat with Frank long after dinner, talking about the past without flinching. I thought success meant leaving you behind, Daniel said. Now I know it means carrying you with me. Frank placed a hand over his son. Just don't drop what matters, he said. The house filled again, with laughter, with noise, with grandchildren's footsteps that echoed through rooms once quiet. Frank became a grandfather the way he had been a father, present, patient, unassuming. One afternoon I watched him teach our grandson how to hold a hammer, the same way he had taught Daniel, slow, careful, respectful of the tool and the hand that held it. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching. That's the man they laughed at, he said quietly. And that's the man who stayed, I replied. We do not talk about the first wedding often, but when we do there is no bitterness left in it, only a lesson learned the hard way. Humiliation reveals more about the people who deliver it than the ones who receive it. Life does not rush to correct injustice, it waits, it watches, and then it teaches. Sometimes through loss, sometimes through clarity, sometimes through the quiet work of becoming someone better. Frank never asked for an apology from the world, and the world never gave him one. Instead, it gave our son a chance to see clearly. That was enough. When I think back to that first wedding, the laughter still echoes in my mind sometimes, not because it hurt the most, but because of what it revealed, about pride, about silence, about the cost of choosing approval over character. I've learned something over the years. Life does not rush to defend the humble, it lets them be tested, watched, misunderstood, and then slowly it shows everyone else what really lasts. My husband never became bitter, he never demanded respect. He simply kept showing up with steady hands and a quiet heart, and in the end that taught our son a lesson no lecture ever could. Daniel lost things he thought defined him, status, comfort, a marriage built on appearances, but he gained something far more important, a sense of who he is when no one is watching, when there's nothing to prove, when the only thing that matters is whether you can live with yourself at the end of the day. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding everything together. Sometimes the lessons we avoid are the ones life insists we learn. If you were in my son's place, would you have spoken up that day, or would you have stayed quiet, hoping peace would come without a price? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if stories like this one speak to you, if they remind you of someone you love or something you've lived through, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe, share your story, and sit with us again next time. Because dignity doesn't need an audience. It just needs time.